welcome aboard.
Please welcome to the stage Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. Like she said, I'm Nathan Bomey. I am a business reporter and co-author of Axios Closer, a daily newsletter on the biggest business stories and trends of the day. Now, there are a few other things happening on stage today in this political world, but we appreciate you joining us early. I'm sure you'll fall asleep before the debate ends tonight because you got here so early for us. So this event, Finding a Place for AI at Work, is going to be a lot of fun to discuss. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage the Special Advisor for AI to the White House, Ben Buchanan.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so the average American's perception of AI probably starts with Terminator 2 or 2001: A Space Odyssey. These like apocalyptic movies. Is that a problem for you? And as we discuss how AI is actually going to affect people's jobs, and does it really color, do you think, how the average American sees how this is going to play out for them?
It is interesting that in global surveys, the country that is most pessimistic about AI is the United States. And I think, I don't know if it's because we've seen more science fiction than other countries or why that is, but I think it's certainly the case that there's sometimes a view that this technology is negative. It's also the case that sometimes that view is warranted. So I think our job here, as the president often says, is to manage the risks so that we can harness the benefits of this. And sometimes science fiction does a good job of describing the risks, and sometimes there's lots of risks that don't show up in science fiction, bias, discrimination, like that we need to make sure we manage as well.
So as the White House AI special advisor, I feel like your job has literally been in the movies in the past.
Yeah, I'd probably more handsome people than me in the movies, but it is a fun intersection of a lot of things.
Okay, so in October, the president issued an executive order on AI requiring that companies, quote, develop standards, tools, and tests to help ensure that AI systems are safe, secure, and trustworthy. So how are we defining safe, secure, and trustworthy?
The analogy I like here is the decathlon, because there's a lot of different events, there's a lot of different parts of that, and the United States can't skip any of them. So I think if you look at those three words of safety, security, and trust, that includes things like making sure the systems don't discriminate. That includes things like making sure the systems protect users' privacies. Of course, making sure if they're used in the workplace, which I'm sure we'll talk about, they're used in a way that protects and uplifts workers rather than undermines them. And make sure the systems do what their users intend them to do, that they're safe and they don't have accidents and the like. So it really is pretty broad and all-encompassing, and that's why the executive order, frankly, is so long in touching so many of these bases.
Okay, so the word trustworthy, though, is pretty interesting because we all understand that AI can be used as a mechanism to distribute falsehoods and misinformation. You've studied that topic in a previous life. So we can't stop that, right? So how can the companies ensure these systems are trustworthy while also knowing that they may be used to spread misinformation?
Yeah, I think this is a case where transparency is really important. So there's a mechanism here of disclosing exactly what you just said, that these systems are imperfect, especially as they're still developing. And then there's also technical work to be done that we are funding through the National Science Foundation and other parts of the US government to try to make these systems more trustworthy. So it's probably a combination of policy solutions and policy approaches, but also technical approaches. And I think a big through line in our policy, not just on trust, but also safety and security, is that we can shape, with the power of the US government, we can shape the technology to be safer, to be more secure, to be more trustworthy.
How does the president feel, though, and how do you feel about how the major AI companies are handling that trustworthy component right now?
The companies made voluntary commitments to us in the summer of 2023, which was, as you know, a very key time in AI. They met personally with the president, talked to the president about this. They met previously to that quite a long meeting in the Roosevelt Room with the vice president to sort of develop the idea of the commitments. And I would say they've held up to those commitments. So the commitments, again, like so much else in AI policy, have a breadth to them. But one aspect of that, for example, on the transparency front, is that one of the things companies committed to and have lived up to is when they publish a major new system, they publish what's called a model card or a transparency report with that system, which shows the testing that they've done and shows the performance of the system on a number of different tasks, often including things like hallucinations and the like. So I think it's important that they're accountable not just to us and the government, but they're publishing and accountable to the American people.
All right, so as we think about the theme of this event, which is about how AI is going to intersect with the workplace, it seems like there's this growing consensus that AI is going to maybe affect white-collar positions, maybe even more than sort of your old-fashioned blue-collar position. Do you share that consensus?
Fortunately, I'm not an economist, so I don't have to tease all this out. We do have great economists at the White House, and one of the things the executive order tasked was for the Council of Economic Advisors to essentially study the disruption and potential disruption. I don't know if they broke it down in the same white-collar, blue-collar way. And I think in some sense, one of their big arguments was that we should look at jobs, yes, but also you should look at tasks within jobs. And all of us use automation as part of our jobs right now. And it doesn't automate the whole job, it automates tasks within it, which is not to say that there won't be jobs that have more or less automation, but I think we try to focus on the task level more than the job level.
Sure. I mean, there are probably, like you said, some jobs that are going to be affected, certainly some jobs that will be affected more than others. When I think about the creative class and this discussion that's going on right now about content creation and actors and musical artists, and those are jobs. That's a workplace that I think is going to be dramatically affected. America, that's a huge export for America,
yeah.
Music and movies. I mean, how do you think that will be impacted, and how can we protect that creative class while also ensuring that AI is not held back?
Yeah, it is so striking that you wouldn't necessarily expect this of President Biden, but this was one of the first things he asked when we were talking about the executive order and prior to that, the voluntary commitments. I think it was in the middle of the Hollywood writers' strike when this particular conversation happened, and he was following that, of course. And he was very engaged on like, what does AI mean for creatives? And we are still developing the executive order, and he was very clear that there's value in using this technology for creativity. I think a lot of creators would acknowledge that, but I think we also want to make sure that creators are compensated fairly. So you can see it in his conversations prior to the executive order. You can see it in the executive order that this is a priority. And then he hosted maybe a couple weeks or a month ago more than 100 creators at the White House, essentially, to talk about this. And I think this is a case where the policy is downstream of the principle that creators should be free to use what they want to use in their creation, and they should be compensated fairly for their work. And how that shakes out through fair use and copyright and so forth is a very complicated question, which actually is more of a legislative question. Copyright Office is part of the legislative branch, and a judicial question than an executive branch one, but certainly one that I think that we feel strongly about.
Do you think human-generated content will become almost a luxury good?
I think there will always be a preference for it. I'm struggling over the term luxury good because I think it will still be ubiquitous in a way that luxury good doesn't necessarily imply. But I think it's fair to say that creators and others, probably in every profession, will have to think about what are they bringing to the equation, what are they bringing to the workplace. And I think there's a lot that humans, even in an age of incredibly powerful AI systems, can bring.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about how this transition to AI in the workplace is going to be equitable, or if it's going to be equitable. There certainly are concerns that algorithms, your old-fashioned algorithms, maybe not AI, take on a lot of the more racist elements of society. If a person's racist, then the algorithm might be racist. So how do we make sure the AI isn't discriminating?
Yeah, this is a huge priority for us. It is a big section of the executive order, a big part of our AI policy. You can see it in the workplace. You can also see it in settings like patient protection and healthcare and the like, where you have algorithms that recommend, without medical justification, different care for people of different races. And this is something that the president feels very strongly about. So one of the things we've tried to do here is say, well, what are the impacts of AI going to be in the workplace? Again, a lot of us have automation in our jobs. There's value to that in some cases. So we're not saying all AI is terrible. But what we've tried to do is put out, as directed by the executive order, a series of best practices and principles from the Department of Labor, basically saying this is what it looks like to integrate well AI into the workplace. And this is what it looks like to give workers a seat at the table and how this technology is used. And if you don't do it well, here are some of the harms that we feel like could result, and some of them are discrimination. I also would go further and say there's others that are not about discrimination per se, but are similarly nefarious and dangerous, things like workplace surveillance and the like. So it tries to include discrimination and bias, but is really a broader look at the risks of AI in the workplace.
Now, you're the former director of the Cyber AI project at Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology. So this is important because just the other day, the administration proposed new standards on cybersecurity and AI. What are they in layman's terms?
I think we are very excited and a little bit worried about the intersection of cyber and AI in general. So there's a bunch of things we've done here. We are, through the executive order, we've tasked critical infrastructure agencies with looking at how AI changes their practice, again, for good and for ill. We've also tried to take steps to get ahead of the curve and how this technology is evolving. One of the ones that is very much in this vein is through DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects agencies, sponsoring a nationwide competition, tens of millions of dollars, to basically perform cyber operations, defensive cyber operations, finding and fixing vulnerabilities using entirely automated tools. So between standards from critical infrastructure provider agencies and forward-looking tech competitions and like, we're trying to get ahead of this one.
All right, well, at Axios, we always like to end our interviews with one fun thing. Let's bring it back to the beginning. What is your favorite AI movie?
Yes, Ex Machina. So a little bit under the radar sometimes, but it is a very interesting movie about sort of confronting the technology and a technology that appears to be human.
Do we all die at the end of that movie? Or?
It goes well for the AIs.
Okay, excellent. So. All right, Ben Buchanan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Please welcome to the stage Axios tech policy reporter, Maria Curie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Maria Curie. I'm a Tech Policy Pro reporter. Our next guest is the Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, the Co-Chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force on AI, and he's a member of the House Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome, California Congressman Ted Lieu. Thank you for being here. All right, so as I mentioned, you're co-chair of the AI task force, and that has been around for about 7 months now. Can you tell us what some of its accomplishments have been so far?
Sure. Thank you for your question, and thank you to Axios for hosting this wonderful event. I'm honored I was selected as a co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force on AI. Our main mission is to provide a report by the end of the year what kinds of AI Congress should regulate and how we might go about doing so. And in the meantime, we're also going to look at if there are some individual bills that the members of AI Task Force would like to support, and then to highlight that to the other members of Congress.
And what's the progress on that as of now?
Yeah. So the task force itself is doing well. We've had a number of hearings. It is very bipartisan. The members are very engaged and asking very insightful questions. The witnesses have been fantastic. Now, overall, there's just a lot of chaos, and I'm just being descriptive here, in a Republican-controlled Congress, right? Some of them are now threatening yet another government shutdown. We've had, a speaker being taken out. We had, at the beginning of last year, a threat to defraud our nation's debts. So just keeping the lights on in a Republican-controlled Congress has been hard.
Do you personally have thoughts at this point in terms of which bills or which areas of AI should make it in that report?
So we're going through that actually this month as we're going through it, and we'll let you and other folks know.
Okay, and it's on track to be finalized by the end of the year?
The report is, yes.
The report, okay. So a major reason that this task force was created was also to collaborate with the Senate. And right before August recess, we saw that GOP leadership kind of poured cold water on pretty much all AI-related legislation, even funding basic research and development. In your view, what are the areas where the House and the Senate can come together to regulate AI?
One person in GOP leadership made some statements, not clear where the other folks are. And my view of politics is everything seems impossible until it happens. And so we're just going to be doing our work, and then we'll see what happens at the end of this year.
Okay. You have said that regulating AI will be a multi-year process with different bills each year addressing different topics. And I'm curious where workforce issues fall into that timeline for you. That's the topic that we're discussing here today. What can Congress accomplish on that topic, and by when? I
think the best way to think about this is it's really hard to predict the future, especially with AI and just with technology in general. So I'll give you an example. So think about the calculator. So who did that help and benefit? Well, it did help people who were really into math, but primarily the people benefited were folks who had math weaknesses, people who were not very good at math, because that product took that weakness completely away. And all of a sudden people could do all sorts of things with a calculator that they never would have been able to do before. So with AI, my suspicion is, yes, it's going to benefit folks who are really into computers, and I'm a recovering computer science major. I love this stuff. But mostly it's going to help people who I think aren't very technical, because it's going to allow them to do amazing technical things that they never could have done before. And the people that advance are folks that can use these AI products in creative, interesting ways.
So it's a matter of upskilling and learning how to use these tools to your benefit.
Yes, I think that's one aspect of it. The other is for people to be comfortable using it, and then figuring out how can they use it to either benefit their family or their workforce or their friends and so on, and those are the folks that will advance.
At this juncture, do you see the government playing a role in terms of ensuring that that transition with AI in the workforce runs more smoothly, and people don't, the risks don't impact them as much?
I think the fundamentals haven't changed, which is that the most impact you can have on a human being's life is ages 0 through 5. Okay. And so we continue to invest in education, invest in teaching people how to think, and then they can use all these tools to benefit their family and their employees and themselves.
Okay. So one thing that we hear a lot is that Congress first has to really understand artificial intelligence before they can regulate it. There have been insight forums, lunches, dinners, people have come and testified at many, many hearings. How do you determine at what point Congress is knowledgeable enough to get to that point?
That's a great question. I don't think you have to know exactly how an AI algorithm works or be able to program code to vote on AI legislation. For the same reason that I have no idea really how a Boeing 787 flies, but I voted on FAA reauthorization, right? And so members of Congress vote 1,000 times every 2 years in our legislative cycles on all sorts of issues. I think it's important that you understand sort of the fundamentals of AI, what it can do, what it cannot do, some of the risks and benefits. And then not only can you vote on it, you can also write your own legislation on it.
Got it. And so one way that AI can impact work for people is in the hiring process. Do you believe that Congress needs to pass new laws to prevent AI-based discrimination, or is it a matter of enforcing existing laws? Where do you stand on that?
So let's just talk about practical realities. And as I said before, in a Republican-controlled Congress, we're just trying to keep the lights on, right? So the notion that we're going to pass some massive 5,000-page AI bill that also regulates 27,000 use cases of AI, including in hiring, I'm not sure that's going to happen this year. So in the first instance, right, we're going to rely on the private sector and the companies that are developing AI to just do the right thing. Now, Congress can take actions that are not passing laws, right? We could hold hearings if you don't do the right thing. We can go to the press and embarrass companies that don't do the right thing. We can write letters to AI developers that don't do the right thing. So there's still things Congress can do, but the notion would be able to sort of pass all these laws on all these different sort of AI use cases this year, I think, is probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Whether it's this year or next year, do you think that this is a specific issue, though, that needs new laws, or do you think that existing, anti-discrimination laws are sufficient?
Right. So it remains to be seen. There's two approaches, right? One is you can say, okay, we have a whole body of law built up over many, many years, for example, an employment law. And what we can do is simply fit AI into that body of law, and then the courts and the various parties can use those laws and adjudicate different issues. So that's one approach. Another approach would be, there's harm if AI has bias and a whole bunch of folks are not hired because of race or gender or another protected class. We could also have laws that say, you cannot deploy this system if it doesn't meet certain, checks or balances. So those are different models. I think it remains to be seen how different states or federal government approaches that.
Got it. AI can also be very beneficial for workers. You're famously known as the first, congressperson to write an entire bill using AI. Can you talk a little bit about how your office and Congress is using the technology? There also have been some limits that have been placed on its use. How are you thinking about the way that it can be useful in legislating and in other workplace settings?
So the way that 99% of people are going to experience AI is in the form of a product. Mm-hmm. So you're going to be given a product. Maybe your company paid for it, or you can go find a free AI product. And sort of my recommendation is just try it out. If it helps you, then use it. If it doesn't help you, then don't use it. And it's because there's so many different use cases and different kinds of AI, it's sort of hard to know how it affects any particular individual or any particular company. To me, if you're going to buy an AI product as a company, some of the things you do is just think about questions you may want to ask the folks who are trying to sell you that product, such as, well, what kind of testing did they do on this product? What kind of biases could there be? What happens if things go wrong? How are things fixed? And so I think asking questions may be more important than anything else in determining what you're going to do with AI.
You're saying that consumers should take that responsibility to ask questions when using these products.
So companies certainly can to try and buy AI software for the company. It is a little more difficult with consumers, and that's one reason, for example, in terms of cybersecurity, that Senator Markey and I introduced the Cyber Shield law that allows companies to put on this designation that, hey, there's some cyber security protection in our products. Very pleased the White House ran with that idea. They now have the Cyber Trust designation, and that's going to be rolling out pretty soon.
Got it. How do you see the election impacting Congress's work on AI legislation? There can be, various outcomes of the election, but what's your assessment of how it will impact lawmakers?
So again, I think it's difficult for Congress to pass really any dramatic laws regarding elections or AI in the limited time we have left before the elections. I do think we do have ability to try to let people know and sort of immunize people about things that might happen with AI, and just let people know that, look, there are things known as deep fakes. If you see a video 3 days before the election that's pretty dramatic, you might think, maybe that's not true. So just go do some double checking and don't believe everything you see on the internet.
In terms of having a change in administration and a potential Trump presidency, how do you see that impacting work on Capitol Hill when it comes to AI legislating?
So Kamala Harris is going to win.
Okay.
But let's say there's different folks in the administration. The Biden-Harris administration has done an amazing job with their executive order on AI. Certainly we can build upon that. But at some point, executive orders can only do so much because you need actual laws to, in my view, put some guardrails on some of the worst aspects of AI.
You mentioned states earlier, and your home state of California, of course, is again being a leader in tech policy, and they have some AI bills floating and debating. What is your take on your home state's work on this?
So California has an amazing privacy law, and I know it's been setting the standard because California is also the 5th largest economy in the world. So if you're going to want to do business with California and with AI and privacy, you're going to comply with that law. Now, I also am fully cognizant that it's sort of stupid to have 50 states have their own privacy laws to have a company try to comply with that. So I'm not opposed to a nationwide privacy law. It just can't be too dramatically weaker than a California law. And I wish members of Congress would understand that, because a lot of folks simply are not going to vote for a bill that's definitely weaker than what California has.
On AI, we're seeing a similar dynamic where California is also leading the way in introducing AI bills, and some are very close to being signed. Do you have an opinion on those AI-related bills in California?
I have not looked at the state bills with enough detail to be able to comment on that.
Okay. You've mentioned a couple of times that it's really unlikely that Congress is going to pass any laws this year. What would you say is your top priority for the next Congress?
It's not that we're not going to pass any laws. It's that I think, dramatic AI regulation is probably unlikely.
Yeah.
But I do think we can pass some bills here and there on various aspects of AI.
Sure.
But the purpose of this report is setting us up for next term to when we hopefully will have not such a chaotic Congress and be able to really focus on regulating AI.
Definitely, that's a good point. There are some AI measures that could make it into the NDAA, and we'll be keeping an eye out for those. For next year, what would you say is your top priority?
So I'm glad you mentioned NDAA. So I do have a bill that I authored that is in the NDAA. It basically says, look, no matter how amazing AI ever gets, we're never, ever going to let it launch a nuclear weapon by itself. We always need a human in the loop. So one of the things to think about is what kind of use cases might we want to require a human in the loop?
Okay. And you're confident that that'll make it into the final NDAA package?
I hope it will. It did pass the House floor, and so hopefully the Senate will agree with the provision.
Okay. And your top priority for next year?
So the report is going to list a set of priorities. My top priority would be to implement the priorities that the report lists out.
Okay.
Yes.
The government is also right now, it needs to be funded, and that's one of the main things that Congress needs to get done too. Can you speak to the importance of funding research and development when it comes to AI and the likelihood that that will happen given the dynamics in the House?
Absolutely. It is extremely critical that you have government funding of AI, particularly when you look at the way the new developments of AI have happened. It is not something that I think if we sort of sat back and looked at it, we would want government to have very little funding because there's so much AI that needs to be done in a way that the private sector simply cannot. And I'll give you an example. If you want to do a lot on AI safety, not a lot of private sector companies are going to do that because that just doesn't make a lot of money, right? But government's one of the few places where you can spend a lot of money doing research on things that don't make money but are super important for society. And I'll give you an analogy. Let's say you're a physicist working on cutting edge physics, and it turns out that every particle accelerator is owned by one of 5 private sector companies. Would we have a problem with that? I think we probably will. But that's what we have right now. If you want to do cutting edge AI, to get that compute power, it's literally owned by just a handful of private sector companies. So if you're an academic researcher or someone in government, you have to ask one of these companies to be able to use that. And I don't know if that's the model we want continuously going forward.
All right. Thank you. Well, that is all the time that we have, unfortunately. We're going to have a quick word from our sponsor next, and then our final guest of the morning. Stay right there. Thank you.
Introducing our View from the Top moderator and Axios publisher, Nicholas Johnston.
Now, all right. Whoa. Good morning, everyone. Great to see you here. Thank you so very much for starting off this beautiful fall morning with us at Axios. We're very grateful for all of you for being here. We're also hugely grateful for our partners. Nothing we do at Axios is possible without the support of our partners. So huge thanks to KPMG for making this morning's conversation possible. So I'm very excited to welcome for a View from the Top conversation, KPMG's Washington, D.C. office managing partner and U.S. federal government practice leader, Patrick Ryan. Patrick, welcome to the Axios stage. Good morning.
Thanks, Nick.
So even though we're in Washington, D.C., you can tell we're the cool guys talking AI because we didn't wear ties this morning.
Yeah, they said no sneakers today. I think my monumental friends are out there, and I know that we wear sneakers when we hang out. So
let's dig in a little bit on the technological side of this. New technology always has like massive opportunities to upend industries, and AI is maybe the first one that comes for your line of work, professional services, knowledge workers. Tell me how you think about the rise of AI at KPMG.
Yeah, I think maybe not everybody knows exactly what KPMG does or anything about what KPMG does. So just to paint a little backdrop, so we're a 130-year-old company. So this isn't we're not a startup. This isn't a new thing. We employ about 250,000 people around the globe. So, when I think back to our founding principles, we were really founded on trust. We were instilled to provide trust in the capital markets. And over those last 130 years, we've seen a lot of rise of technology. This certainly is one of, if not the most significant elements. But this isn't our first rodeo in terms of handling disruption in professional services. So thinking about really how to approach that has been not dissimilar on how we've approached a lot of other periods of disruption over that time frame. First was with the governance mindset that internally we really are thinking governance first. We appointed essentially a chief AI officer very early on in this journey to make sure that this was a properly governed approach across our company. And I think one of the first things that we encountered was that it was roughly 2 years ago that a number of these chatbots became available to the public. As our clients are very, very sensitive about their data, the first thing we needed to do was make sure that we had our own systems internally, that people weren't sourcing public information. So we developed a bunch of in-house tools that were on our servers in our cloud to make sure that we weren't releasing data to the public. The second big element was really focus on upskilling and training. So developing training, we've had over 95% of our employees that have completed AI training, and that's something we're really, really proud of, that it's been really embraced by the workforce. And systems-wise, that chief AI officer has really made sure that we're not approaching this in a vacuum. This is not a single functional way of approaching AI. All of our functions, all of our people have lived AI. We regularly have things like hackathons so that it's embraced within our culture. And like you heard about earlier, really making sure that this is a mindset that's adopted across the workforce is super important to us.
I want to come back to the upskilling part in a second, but let's get back to the clients a little bit. So now you created this system built internally, built on trust. When you make it available to clients, like how do they view it? How do they look at it? How is it disrupting their lives?
Yeah, we have a lot of clients that are coming to us asking on how it's impacted us and if we can advise them on what it's going to mean for them.
Right.
Human-centric businesses are massively impacted. I think probably the biggest ones that we saw right out the gate, that financial services and technology are among the more impacted sectors, that there are certainly lots of sectors that are going to be impacted. Those that rely heavily on a human workforce like ours are looking at different ways to provide services to their customers or different ways that people work. And particularly in technology, it's just the way people provide services is so massive. The flip side of that in financial services is that there's just so much data in financial services that the way data is processed back 100 years ago was very human-driven. Into the future, it's not going to be as human-driven. So I think especially with financial services, a lot of the engagements that we've had, a lot of the clients that we've been working with have been very based on what's the risk-based approach that I take before I put in technology? How do I put the right governance platform in place so that I'm not immediately empowering my entire workforce to use technology and then getting a bad answer out of that I am overly reliant on technology.
Yeah. How do you do this a little bit deeper on that? Having the AI do the thing or be a tool for a human to do the thing? Where do you come down on that kind of balance, or how does that evolution playing itself out?
I personally believe, and I know that everybody that's come in the 130 years prior to me has been, that we are a human-first business.
Right.
Not everybody is, and certainly there are a lot of software companies and technology companies that are embracing AI first. But I think there was a remark made earlier about the luxury of a human product, and particularly in client service. I think the touch, and what we've seen since the pandemic, is this touch of human-to-human interaction, in whatever form that is, in our business and in professional services, is so unique that it can be informed by,
right.
and I can do all my research using AI to make this a more meaningful conversation, but there's not anything that replaces the human element of
robots could do this, fortunately, yet.
Yeah.
That keeps us in line of work.
Unless I find out that you're an AI-generated
So then
bot.
with AI being a piece of this, let's get back to that upskilling part. What are your clients, or what are you thinking about as far as how do you train people to fit in that kind of world? What are the skills or additional tasks they need to be able to do?
We really think everybody at our company should be embracing AI and what they do, and that it's going to change what they do. That could be a small amount to a really large amount. We came out first and said, we're going to make training available early on how to use all of our tools and technology, that as we're developing those tools, training's been developed at the same time. This isn't something where we just put a tool out there and have people hope that they figure out how to use it. We also developed a trusted AI training that's mandatory for our employees to get access to the tools, and the vast majority of our employees have taken that. So
train before you can play around with these kinds of things.
Train before you can play.
Right.
And the element of that trusted AI training for us and we really think it should be the same for basically every company that's out there, is that there are just basic risk frameworks on the ethics behind AI. How can you use AI? When should you disclose that you're using AI? Making it very clear to your supervisors when you have enabled a piece of product using AI, because what we have found very early on in this process is that there's a lot of unknown unknowns. You may be using AI and there may be things that you don't know to check, and without the right risk framework and the right disclosure, we could get a terrible outcome relative to how we're using AI. So trust up front in that training before you have access to the tools, we think is really important.
Right. So I love doing these events in Washington, D.C. because when we have these topics, the people who show up, they know their stuff. They're writing the policy, they're directing the government in this. How can they help? What should they be aware of as far as those kinds of rules or regulations, or also helping with training?
Yeah, so we are a governed industry by a number of governing bodies, so that's our relationship with our regulators is super important. A number of the things that we do, we will not be able to provide those services using AI until we've got a level of blessing and alignment with our regulators. So if there are any of those regulators listening or in the public, know that we are very actively engaging with them around the types of services that we're doing. I think more broadly, cloud and cyber are some of my biggest concerns around AI. I think there was a remark made earlier that cyber and AI are kind of hard to differentiate. The computing power and the use of the cloud environment is so critical to being able to deploy AI that if you don't have a secure cloud environment, you can't deploy AI.
Right.
The governance around those cloud environments and cyber controls are going to be really, really critical to make sure that all companies can access AI. And there's a lot of really important pieces of legislation that we've talked about earlier today that will ensure that everybody has access to the right technology so that they can deploy AI safely.
Right. This comes back a little bit to what you said earlier about the trust element of it. When the computers are hoovering up all this kind of information, how do you make sure bad actors or your competitors or just the public doesn't get access to all of that? You think that should be generally a policy and regulatory?
Absolutely.
focus?
Yeah, I think having access to a secure cloud environment to be able to deploy AI is really, really important. And both of the speakers before me talked about the regulations around technology. It's only going to become more important that, particularly as I think about in this community here in DC, I am really excited about the startup community. The startup community is going to have a hard time accessing some of these tools and technologies if we don't make a widely available, secure cloud environment available to them at a reasonable cost.
Right.
And it's available to the really big companies right now. We have a very large federal contracting business. That is governed by the US government. There are a lot of really tough rules around cyber that make sure that we have the right controls in place. And for startups to have that same access to cloud environments, it's going to be really important that there's a level of regulatory framework around that.
Yeah. We're about to get the hook here, so Axios, sell us in on one fun thing. Let's make it one AI thing. How are you using AI in your real life?
I like to think I'm a great parent. I probably am not. If my wife was watching her in the room, she would say that. We have a 5, almost 7-year-old and 9-year-old. I notoriously use chatbots for parenting. And the other night, I had a child come in after a nightmare, and I just pulled up my phone and said, how do I deal with the child that's dealing with a nightmare?
And it worked?
And it worked. This time it worked. It has not worked all times, but if you're struggling with some young child parenting dilemmas like I do, it's out there to help.
And hopefully your child's nightmares are in a secure cloud somewhere.
I hope so. Yeah, that's right.
All right, this was tremendous. Patrick, thanks so much for being here. Thank you, KPMG, for making today possible. Let's bring Nathan back to the stage to wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Welcoming back to the stage, Nathan Bomey.
Hey. All right. You've made it to our last guest. Our next guest is an expert helping businesses implement AI in the workplace. Please welcome Global Managing Partner at IBM Consulting, Jill Goldstein. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much. So, I feel like the world's first introduction to AI in some ways was a little thing called Watson that IBM did. And I remember watching Watson defeat Ken Jennings in Jeopardy more than a decade ago. So what's up with Watson these days? Like, is he doing any more game shows, anything like that?
Watson is growing up.
Okay.
And Watson has a new name. Watson is now called Watson X. And Watson has continued to grow over time with the infusion of artificial intelligence and most recently generative AI. But it's also taken on a new flavor, and that is there are modules around it that help around governance, trust, transparency, visibility, to address a lot of the things the first three speakers spoke about.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that trust and transparency and visibility. We talked about that with Ben Buchanan, Special Advisor for AI to the White House. How does IBM approach the question of trust and transparency, knowing that you're a competitive business and you don't want to give away the trade secrets?
So this is some place where actually IBM is very, very upfront and transparent. If you were to go on to IBM.com, we actually publish and have for over 10 years our principles around responsible AI, trust, and transparency. And there are a few tenets there that guide us internally on the way that we use, and equally as important, don't use artificial intelligence. We talk about the fact that human has to be in the loop of very key and important decisions, that the data and the algorithms are owned by the people who started with the ownership of the data and the algorithms, and that people should understand how their data is being used. It's much more robust than that. In addition, though, and this is the important, is around execution. Within IBM, there's an ethics board. And whenever we want to use AI in a new and unique way, there's a review of the use case that's specifically around that artificial intelligence. And there's approval on how to use it, and then it's equally as important how it won't be used. And so I would say that it is really robust in the way that we share the information internally and externally around our ethics.
Well, it's interesting, though, because the culture of Silicon Valley has historically been this move fast and break things. And I'm not sure that there's much room for an ethics board in move fast and break things. So does that philosophy potentially hold IBM back when it comes to development of AI?
I would say no. I understand the point, though, and I think it's a very interesting conversation to have. The reality is that several years ago, when artificial intelligence was really taking up speed, I don't know if many of you remember in the news the swirl that happened around recruiting bias, right? And so what happened was, as an industry, we were going fast. And as a result, we were disadvantaging people in the process. So I think we learned from that pretty readily and decided that sometimes you have to go slow to go fast in a responsible way.
Okay, so this event is about finding discovering how AI is going to impact the workplace. There's this growing narrative that people who use AI will be the ones who replace people who don't use AI. Do you subscribe to that?
I do. I think we talked earlier about the fact that organizations are focusing on tasks, which makes sense. In reality, though, there will be the extremes on both ends. There will be some roles where most of the tasks become obsolete, and there will be some roles that are newly emerged because of new skills that are required as a result of artificial intelligence. But most people are in the middle, right? It's people who work with AI will replace people who don't work with AI. Most of us actually use artificial intelligence today, whether or not it be in the search engines that we use or within the corporate structure, Teams or Zoom or WebEx. So I actually think that many of us have already dipped our toe into it and we're embracing it. And I think that's probably the most thoughtful way to go. Each of us will have an opportunity over time, I believe, to have more dedicated support from artificial intelligence, but that's a little ways away.
There's obviously a lot of fear, though, out there, and Ben Buchanan earlier today said the U.S. workforce is actually the most concerned about AI in the world. And so when you advise businesses on how to implement AI, what are you saying in terms of how to overcome that cultural obstacle?
So the first thing is I coach all organizations to start off with a commitment to trust and transparency and publish it so that internally your workforce understands your red lines. That actually helps them to engage in a conversation around risks and concerns. The second is that I think all organizations have an obligation to generally increase the technical acumen of their workforce. That helps to demystify the road ahead. It also helps them, I think, engage more thoughtfully with the IT function, with vendors who are using artificial intelligence in the applications that they currently use, and quite frankly, just give them a vocabulary more generally. And then the third is learn by doing. It's really difficult to have an informed conversation around artificial intelligence if you're just doing it based on what you've read. And you need a culture where it's okay to fail fast and learn, pivot, and then succeed. So I think it's those things in combination that are really helping organizations get past the myth of AI and understand the value of it.
Okay, so you said mystify, this idea of demystifying, the demystification is a big word for like before 9 a.m.
Yeah, it is.
Demystification of AI.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
There is fear, right? Your reference to Terminator earlier,
sure.
right? I think all of us in some way have that as a pivot,
Sure.
or somewhere as perhaps the future. And I think the reality is, as I mentioned, AI has existed for the last 10 years, and is inherent a lot of the things we've been doing. It's been a little bit more transactional in nature. I think where the fear comes into play is when we start thinking about things that are being introduced through generative AI, which are some of the buddies, right? It's what I think we all played with when ChatGPT first came out. I think that's really what's informing the fear. So if you put employees in a position where they can help define what the future of their role is by having a say in how AI is going to inform their role, it really cuts through it pretty significantly.
We spoke earlier with Ben about how AI is going to affect the creative class, and you mentioned that IBM's stance is that the person who creates the content should own the content. But what happens when the content is fully created by the AI?
Could you ask the question differently?
Well, you know, if AI actually, let's say AI writes a novel or makes a movie, maybe I feed it a prompt, but do I own that? If I feed it a prompt, the AI did all the work.
So the prompt is a skill, right? We've heard about prompt engineering, but that's just the skill of figuring out how to use the data that's there.
Sure.
The algorithms are actually based on how you've taught the model to use the data that's inherent in it. So just because you've prompted the content doesn't give you rights to the content of the algorithm that is used to manipulate and then form the content for consumption. So to specifically answer your question, no, I do not believe that by simply prompting the data, you by nature own the outcome.
No. Let's revisit this ethics question, though, because it does seem like there's a conflict in Silicon Valley right now over how quickly to move. We see what happened at OpenAI, where there was a near implosion of the leadership because of this discussion, this debate over how quickly they should move, whether they were being safe enough. You know, for IBM, you've got this ethics board, but you know, you're going to feel the pressure from shareholders to move quick and to make money. And so ultimately, isn't there a risk of falling behind?
No, because what we're doing in a very client-centric way, right? So I think that what we could have done is started to produce a lot of widgets, right? Software products, and sell it to the market and feel like we were generating revenue in a very benign sort of way. But what we've done is actually, with the benefit of watsonx, thanks for setting me up, we're able to go and talk to clients about what they're trying to accomplish, work with those organizations to understand their current technology landscape, the data that they have access to and are eligible to use, and then put together a fit-for-purpose solution that makes sense for their organization and their employees in a very thoughtful way. And because we're not doing a forced fit product, we're able to make sure that it's very thoughtful of each client, their culture, and the regulatory environment in which they survive.
Okay. All right, so you just recently came out with a report entitled Reimagining Human Potential in the Generative AI Era, and you interviewed executives, C-suite executives, talked about that resistance to change in those discussions. What were your key findings in this report?
So I would tell you that this is one of the things that still causes me to sit back a little bit, is the fact that CEOs generally don't believe their workforce is ready for artificial intelligence, although they believe that over half of them need to be reskilled in the next 3 years. That's actually in conflict with employees who are surveyed, who believe that they're already using it today and they don't know why the CEO is taking so long to introduce it into the workforce. And I think that really, quite frankly, the missing link right now is the fact that what we traditionally call middle management is not engaged in the conversation. And so as we did this study with Oracle, what we learned was the fact that generally AI literacy falls like 8th in the list of workforce capabilities. And so in order to make sure that we're having a shared conversation, right, what the study really calls out is the fact that we have to educate all. Technical acumen needs to increase for everyone so that we can have the same conversation across the workforce around strategy and execution.
So in other words, you can't wait for higher education, for colleges to educate students. You need to do it yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, to follow up on a conversation we had, IBM, Google, Tesla, there are several organizations out there that several years ago dropped the requirement of 4-year degrees for many of their technology jobs. Because the reality is that the technology is moving faster today than yesterday, and it'll go faster tomorrow. And in order to keep pace with technology, you really need to hire for someone who has an agility for learning and is agile enough to pivot based on the needs of the market. And so I see that as one step forward to making sure that you have the right people in the roles, not only for today, but they're set up for tomorrow.
And that's very interesting because I know that this is something we're seeing throughout corporate America now. More and more companies saying 4-year degree is not necessarily required to be hired. Now, some of that may be because the economy is doing well, the job market's doing well, maybe you lower your standards a bit. But here you're saying that this is actually nothing about lowering our standards. This is about actually raising our standards.
Absolutely. And you know, one of the things I do for clients is my business does recruiting for clients, right? And over the years, what we found is that for a lot of these hot skills, these emerging technology skills, there is a global, national, regional, and local skills shortage. So by nature, you have to build the skill set. And you want to build it with someone who is proven to be agile in their learning profile and portfolio. And so it was out of need several years ago that organizations started pivoting to this.
Well, and I know that you also believe that this is part of ensuring an equitable transition from maybe non-AI to AI, if you want to put it that way. How does that work? Why is that important?
Well, we all know that technology is an enabler, right? It's an enabler of the business, the workforce, how an organization serves its community, or quite frankly, makes money. And in order to make sure that AI and the transition to AI is equitable, you need to make sure that your workforce and the people doing the work are representative of the communities you're serving and the clients you're serving. And the best way to do that is by eliminating arbitrary barriers and increasing the aperture. So I think this move has definitely helped organizations to advance. That combined with, I'm going to go back to that ethics board and the commitment to trust and transparency, I think make a nice marriage.
Yeah. Okay, well, at Axios, like I said, we always like to end with one fun thing. We're going to ask you the same question we asked Ben Buchanan, which is, what's your favorite AI movie?
Ah, man.
And does everyone die in the end, is my question.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I would say that it actually is the Terminator.
The Terminator,
It is. It is, because I think that's really when I started to get excited about the art of the possible. Let's remember the good guy wins.
Hey, that's right.
That's right.
Arnold is a good guy in The Terminator. Okay, well, that's going to be all we have. We really appreciate everyone joining us today, and thank you to our sponsor, KPMG. Hey, this is a big day for people who want to be president, but it's also a big day for Axios because we are launching the Money Game today on Amazon. This is our series, which is featuring the name, image, and likeness discussion going on in college sports and features a lot of famous athletes at LSU. So check that out on Amazon. Thank you to Jill, and thank you to all of you, and have a great morning.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, you're going to bring your glasses there.
Oh, thank you.